How exactly do you pull an 87-year-old shipwreck from the bottom of the Atlantic when dozens of lives and the literal truth of what happened are trapped inside? In this explainer, we're jumping straight into a deeply emotional, incredibly complex marine operation. Back on July 18, 2016, the Guyanese passenger ferry MV Barima capsized, and what we're looking at now is one of the most difficult salvage missions in recent memory. It's this high-stakes balancing act between the absolute, undeniable humanitarian necessity of recovering the victims and the extreme technical risks of lifting a fragile, flooded hull.
So here's our roadmap. We're going to cover the MV Barima tragedy, the humanitarian necessity behind the recovery, the incredible engineering challenge, the technical salvage methods being used, and finally, the wreck as evidence. Let's get right into it.
Number 1, the MV Barima tragedy. We have to start with the heart of this story, the devastating events of Saturday night, July 18, 2026. The MV Barima, it was a familiar sight. It served the Northwest District route, but that night, about 7 miles offshore, it got struck by a massive wave and capsized in an instant. Brave rescue efforts managed to pull 76 people to safety, but the tragic reality is that 73 are confirmed dead, including at least 15 children. And with 30 people still missing, many are presumed trapped inside that sunken hull. That grim fact shifts this whole operation from a rescue mission into an incredibly urgent, solemn recovery effort.
Which brings us to part 2, the humanitarian necessity. Why is this insanely challenging recovery an absolute moral imperative? Well, it's not just about clearing a shipping lane. It's fundamentally about preserving human dignity.
But since divers simply can't safely enter the vessel where it currently lies, raising the entire hull becomes the absolute only viable way to bring those victims back to their loved ones. So yes, it's a massive technical headache, but it's an absolute humanitarian necessity to bring these families some closure.
All right, Section 3, the engineering challenge. We know exactly why they have to raise the Barima, but why is marine salvage in this specific environment so ridiculously difficult?
The physics of this are actually fascinating. Think about it. A ship that normally weighed 400 to 600 tons essentially doubles in weight once it sinks, floods with water, and sinks into that dense seabed mud. To pull it completely free, engineers calculate they need a massive breakout force of 800 to 1,200 tons just to overcome the sheer power of the mud's suction. And on top of that weight, the divers are facing an absolute nightmare environment. Sure, the 10 to 20 meter depth is relatively accessible, but the physical conditions? Brutal. Divers are battling the rapid Guyana current, which basically restricts their working windows to various specific tides. Worse, they're operating right in the middle of the Amazon Asico sediment plume. That means underwater visibility is literally zero. Zero! They're doing heavy, complex engineering entirely by feel in pitch black water.
But honestly, the biggest engineering risk of all is the condition of the ship itself. The MV Barima was built in Scotland way back in 1939. We're talking about an 87-year-old riveted steel hull. Government tender documents from just months before it sank actually pointed out deteriorated hull pleating and wasted frames. So the terrifying reality for the salvage master is this. If you apply 1,200 tons of upward lift to aging, rusted steel, the whole thing could just tear apart. That would scatter the very evidence and, more importantly, the victims' remains they are trying so desperately to protect.
Let's look at part 4, technical salvage methods. With these massive structural and environmental risks staring them down, how on earth do marine engineers actually plan to pull this off without snapping the ship in half? Well, the core solution relies on a pretty vital piece of salvage tech: buoyancy airbags. The International Salvage Team is planning to deploy 1,500 tons of these specialized, heavy-duty inflatable lifting bags. Divers have to go down there in that zero visibility we talked about and carefully secure these bags to the strongest remaining structural points of the hull. Then they slowly fill them with compressed air to gradually, carefully counteract the ship's massive flooded weight. The whole methodology demands just incredible precision. First, they actually have to slightly reposition the wreck by bottom towing it just to get better physical access. Step 2, divers attach that vast array of buoyancy bags. Third, they pump in the air to carefully break that intense mud suction we mentioned earlier. Again, doing this without snapping the hull. Finally, they refloat the vessel just enough so they can tow it suspended underwater into shallower, calmer waters near the shore, where the recovery of the victims can finally safely take place. And that leads us to our final section. Part 5, the wreck as evidence. We really need to look at the aftermath here. Recovering the ship isn't just an engineering marvel or a humanitarian duty. It is fundamentally about undeniable justice. It's about finding out exactly what went wrong.
There is an internal investigative document that captures this perfectly, stating the hull must be treated as an exhibit, not as debris. The recovered ship is quite literally the only physical proof the Independent Commission of Inquiry has. Every single major question: was the hull breached before the wave hit? Were the cargo hatches properly secured? Was the steel simply too degraded to be out on the water? All of that can only be answered by analyzing the ship itself. It's a crime scene. It is a critical piece of evidence.
Now, to ensure the truth isn't washed away or accidentally destroyed during the salvage, investigators are demanding some incredibly strict legal protocols. They're requiring comprehensive pre-disturbance sonar surveys before the ship is moved even an inch. They absolutely need an independent chain of custody established so the very government agencies being investigated aren't the sole keepers of the evidence. And crucially, once it's raised, they have to perform ultrasonic thickness gauging on the steel to see exactly how much metal actually stood between the passengers and the ocean. And just look at this glaring discrepancy in the official cargo records. This right here proves why getting the physical wreck back is so vital. The maritime regulator stated the cargo rating was 126 tons, but then the minister claimed 284 tons, and other reports suggest 268 tons were actually loaded that night. I mean, that is a massive difference, and cargo weight directly impacts a ship's stability. The only way investigators can weigh the truth of what really caused the capsize is by recovering the wreck and physically documenting what was inside. Ultimately, the way this rusted, 87-year-old hull is handled over these next few weeks is going to dictate the legacy of this entire tragedy. The engineering feasibility is there, and as we've seen, the humanitarian necessity to recover these lost lives to preserve their dignity is just absolutely undeniable. But as those airbags inflate and the MV Barima slowly rises from the dark mud of the Atlantic, it leaves us with one massive question. What will the Commission of Inquiry ultimately uncover in those depths?